show more, 10:28, collect your things and leave. Those were the first words that mattered that morning. Not because they were shocking, but because they were delivered with a certainty that made everyone stop breathing. The conference room on the 9th floor stretched out like a power line. 62 people, one long table. Diana Ashford standing at the head like she was born to command exactly this kind of space. She was 41. She'd been running Aurora Systems for 5 years. And in those 5 years, she'd built something most executives only dream about. A room that never broke. A floor that never bent. A company that ran on time on appearance on the agreement that professionalism wasn't a preference. It was a baseline. The kind of room where nobody laughed at the wrong moment because Diana had spent 5 years making sure of it. She was 41 slides into a 60-slide presentation when it happened. Her voice steady, her posture perfect, every metric on the screen trending upward, and then the door opened. He was 7 minutes late. In Diana's world, this wasn't small. 7 minutes late meant you didn't respect people's time. It meant you thought your schedule mattered more than theirs. It meant you were the kind of person who needed correcting. Diana didn't look up right away. She felt it first. The disruption, the weight of it. The particular offense of lateness in a room built on time. She moved to the next slide and let the silence do the work. Let him feel the attention find him. Then she looked. Faded flannel, unbrushed hair, and hanging from his left shoulder swinging once as he eased the door shut behind him. A child's Dinosaur backpack in worn green canvas. Diana's eyes moved over him slowly. Not with disgust exactly, with something colder. With the particular clarity of someone cataloging a failure. Someone who'd already decided what they were looking at before they finished looking. She knew his name. Ethan Cole, 9th floor. Mid-level analyst, 5 years in the building. Mostly invisible. The kind of employee who did work quietly and didn't announce when he left. He was pleasant enough when people tried talking to him. He just never gave them much to hold on to. He carried a small frame photograph at his desk beside his laptop. Nobody on the floor had ever asked who she was. But what Diana noticed first, what stuck was this. He wasn't embarrassed. Most people would have apologized, would have explained, would have tried to make themselves smaller. But Ethan Cole set the backpack down gently, deliberately, like he was handling something precious instead of something that exposed him. And when his eyes found hers, for 1 second, Diana felt something unexpected. Not anger, not yet. A question mark, a moment of what is he? Something flickered across her face, recognition of something. But she couldn't quite place it. It was gone before she could hold it, and then her control reasserted itself like a hand closing over her thoughts. She moved to the next slide. "Collect your things and leave," she said. Her voice carried without effort the way it always did. Effective immediately. People like you have no place in a company that wants to be taken seriously. The room absorbed it completely. No one exhaled. No one moved. It was the kind of silence that only comes after something's been said that can't be unsaid. Ethan didn't flinch. He stood there for a moment. Long enough for Rachel Martinez, a junior analyst sitting 3 seats from the end, to notice something in his expression. Not devastation, not fury, not even particularly surprised. He looked like someone who'd just made a phone call he'd been waiting a very long time to make. He reached down and unhooked the backpack from his shoulder. He set it on the floor carefully. The way you set something down when you don't want it to get scuffed. Then he took out his phone. He pressed a single contact. He waited 2 seconds. Marcus. His voice was exactly the same as it had been in every early morning, every unremarkable Tuesday, every quiet afternoon on the 9th floor. Get up to the conference room right now. He ended the call before the other end could answer. He looked at the security guard, a young man named David, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and gave him a small nod. Then he walked toward the door. Steady. No performance in it. His shoulders didn't shake. His head didn't drop. He just walked like a man who'd decided something and was following through. And the last thing Rachel saw before the door closed behind him was the angle of his expression. Not devastated. Not furious. Not even particularly surprised. He looked like someone who'd just made a phone call he'd been waiting a long time to make. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Marcus Webb didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, all 9 flights. Not because he was afraid of enclosed spaces, because he needed time to understand what was happening. Because some part of him, the part that understood numbers with the precision most people reserved for language, already knew. And knowing meant accepting something he'd been avoiding for a very long time. He was the company's CFO. Marcus Webb understood numbers. He understood ratios and percentages and the way compound interest could turn $5 into $5,000 if you just gave it enough time. He understood the mathematics of growth. But as he climbed those stairs, the number that kept returning was 15. 15 minutes since Ethan called him. 15 minutes in which Diana Calloway had convinced herself the situation was still manageable, that she'd done the right thing, that standards mattered more than circumstances, that a room full of witnesses meant she'd been right to act. 15 minutes of her sitting in that conference room, explaining to 62 people why unprofessionalism couldn't be tolerated, why exceptions were the first sign of a failing system, why someone who'd bring a child's backpack into a professional space was exactly the kind of person who didn't belong. Marcus understood something about his partner that Diana did not. He'd known Ethan Cole longer than Diana had known the company. He'd watched Ethan build this place from nothing. From a rented room with 2 desks and a printer that jammed every 3rd page. From an idea that Sarah had and a commitment that Ethan had made. And he'd watched Ethan step back from running it. Not away, just back. Choosing to manage his stake quietly rather than occupy the chair at the head of the room. Because there was a 6-year-old who needed a parent who was present. Not just employed, present. This morning that 6-year-old had scraped her palm on the pavement outside her school gate. Ethan had cleaned the graze with the first aid kit he kept in his car. Had crouched down on the sidewalk and told her she was strong. Had made sure she felt safe before bringing her to work. Because he had no childcare that morning. And he had a meeting he couldn't miss. And Diana had fired him for it. Marcus reached the conference room. He pushed the door open without knocking. Diana was mid-sentence. She was addressing the 4 people still seated around the conference table. 2 members of her immediate team, one HR coordinator who looked deeply uncomfortable, a senior account manager who had the expression of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. She turned when Marcus entered, and Marcus could see it in her face. The assumption that this was still a situation she controlled, that whatever was happening could be managed, that he was coming to support her decision. "We need to talk," Marcus said. And then he told her, not in the lobby, not in the hallway. Right there in that conference room in front of the people, Diana had chosen to witness her moment of triumph. He told her that the man she'd just fired wasn't a mid-level analyst. He told her that Ethan Cole had founded Aurora Systems, that he'd built it from nothing with his wife, that when his wife died 2 years ago, he'd stepped back from the CEO role. Not because he'd lost interest, but because he had a daughter who needed him. Because sometimes the most important work isn't the work that gets announced in meetings. He told her that Ethan had been coming in late and leaving early by choice, that his job was to be a present parent, and she'd fired him for it. In front of 62 witnesses, Diana's face went through several expressions. Shock, disbelief, then something worse. Understanding. "That's not possible," she said. "It's very possible," Marcus replied quietly. "And it happened about 20 minutes ago." Diana stood very still. The room around her seemed to have gotten smaller. Or maybe she had gotten smaller. It was hard to tell anymore. She left the conference room. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain. She just left. And Marcus sat down in the chair Diana had vacated and waited for what came next. Diana didn't know what to do with herself, so she rode the elevator down to the 9th floor. She told herself she was going to find Ethan, to explain, to understand what had happened, to make this right somehow. But what she found instead was him on his knees beside a young girl. The girl was 6 years old. She had dark eyes, a serious expression, the same stubborn angle to her jaw that Ethan had. She was wearing a school uniform, and she was watching her father like his opinion mattered more than anything else in the world. Her name was Lily. Ethan was tying the laces on the green Dinosaur backpack, the same one he'd carried into Diana's presentation that morning. The same one Diana had interpreted as a sign of carelessness. A sign of someone who didn't take their job seriously. A sign of someone who didn't belong. "Does this stay?" Lily asked. She was tugging at a loose seam. "Will it break?" "It stays," Ethan said, not dismissively, with actual consideration. Like she'd asked him a real question, like her concern mattered. "It's strong. Green things are always strong." Why Lily pressed? Because they survive, because they grow, because they don't give up even when things get hard. Diana stood at the edge of the open floor. She was invisible. She wasn't part of this moment. She was just watching, and she couldn't look away. She'd built her reputation on power, on clarity, on knowing exactly what she was looking at and making decisions accordingly. on her ability to read a room and a person and understand what they were really about. She was excellent at this. People told her so. The board told her so. Her father, the previous CEO, had told her so before he retired and left her to run his company. But standing here watching Ethan kneel in the same faded flannel shirt he'd worn to her meeting, watching him speak to this child like she was the most important thing in this building or any building, watching the way his hand came up to cradle the back of her head when she hugged him, watching him close his eyes for just a moment, like he was gathering strength from her. Diana felt something shift inside of her. She'd been wrong. Not about the backpack technically, not about the lateness as a violation of policy, but about who he was, about what his choices meant, about what she was actually looking at when she looked at him. She'd seen a man in a faded shirt who didn't fit into the world she'd built. She'd seen someone who didn't match. And she'd decided in that moment that he wasn't worth her time, that he wasn't serious enough, that people like him had no place in a company that wanted to be taken seriously. And in doing that, she'd missed everything. She'd missed that he was a father who cleaned his daughter's wounds on the sidewalk before coming to work. She'd missed that he carried a photograph of his dead wife beside his laptop every single day. She'd missed that he was building a life that mattered. Not a career, a life. Ethan stood the backpack secure and took his daughter's hand. He didn't see Diana, he didn't know she was there. And that was maybe the worst part of all. That he didn't need her to see him. That he was already seen, already known, by this child, completely. He walked across the open floor past Diana's hiding place near the elevator, and she let him go. Because what else could she do? She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with understanding what that choice meant. Ethan didn't go home immediately after dropping Lily at her after-school program. He drove to the office instead. He parked in the parking garage. He took the elevator to the 9th floor, and he walked to his desk, the one that was ordinary and unannounced in the middle of the open floor. And he sat down. The photograph of Sarah was still there. The woman he'd built this company with. The woman he'd spent 7 years in a rented room with building something real. The woman who'd held up that first signed client contract with both hands like it was a trophy. The woman who died 2 years ago. In a moment that still didn't feel real. He looked at her face, at the smile frozen in time, at the way she was looking at something the camera couldn't see. And then Diana appeared at the edge of his desk. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the thing that had been holding her together had come loose, and she couldn't quite gather it back up. "I owe you an apology," she said. Ethan looked at her. He didn't stand. He didn't offer her a chair. He just looked at her and waited. "You owe me a lot of things," he said quietly. "An apology is the least useful one." Diana felt that like a physical blow. She wanted to explain. She wanted to say that she hadn't known, that she'd made a decision based on incomplete information, that if she'd known who he was, she would have handled it differently. But before she could speak, Ethan continued. "I know what you didn't know," he said. "That's the problem, Diana. You made a decision about who I was based entirely on what you could see. And what you could see was a man in a faded shirt who was 7 minutes late. You didn't know that my daughter scraped her palm on the pavement outside her school this morning. You didn't know that I had to clean the grays and make sure she felt safe before bringing her to work. You didn't know that I had no childcare that morning, and that I had a meeting I couldn't miss." He stood now, not to intimidate her, but because the weight of this moment required it, and you saw that as unprofessional, as a sign that I didn't belong, as something worth firing me over in front of 62 people. Diana wanted to protest. She wanted to explain about standards and expectations. She wanted to defend the system she'd built, but Ethan was already speaking. "When my wife died 2 years ago, I had a choice to make," he said. "I could climb. I could become the CEO. I could build on what we had created. Or I could step back and be a present parent to the daughter she left behind. I chose to step back. Not because I didn't believe in this company anymore, but because I believed that my daughter needed me more. And I was willing to be invisible for that. I was willing to let people like you think I was less than. As long as I could pick her up from school and tell her that she was strong." He moved toward the window, toward the city beyond it, the city that didn't care about corporate hierarchies, that didn't know the difference between a CEO and a mid-level analyst, that just kept moving forward regardless of who was in charge. "But what you did this morning wasn't just cruel," he said. "It was typical. You fire people for not fitting. You push them out for being human in places you've decided humanity is unprofessional, and nobody stops you because you're very good at what you do. You're excellent at making a company that runs like a machine. He turned to face her. But machines don't have the complexity to do the work this company actually does. People do. Flawed, tired, struggling, overextended people who show up anyway. And you've been pushing them out. All of them. Diana stood very still. She could feel the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She could feel the space between who she thought she was and who she actually was growing wider. And there was nothing she could say that would bridge that gap. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen," Ethan said. His voice was low, but it filled the entire floor. "You're going to reverse the firing. You're going to meet with the 4 people you've pushed out over the past 2 years. You're going to listen while they tell you what your system actually cost them. And then you're going to help them rebuild what they've lost. Not because I'm asking you to, but because you finally understand what you've been doing." "And if I don't?" Diana asked. "Then you leave," Ethan said. "And I rebuild this company into something that doesn't require people to disappear in order to succeed." Diana understood then. There was no negotiation here. There was no redemption available that she got to control. She'd been weighed and found wanting, and she had to live with that. She left his office without saying anything else. There was nothing left in the sequence that would change what was already true. She'd looked at Ethan Cole and seen exactly what she expected to see. And that in the end was the only mistake she ever made. As she walked back to her office, people watched her. They could feel something in the air. Something had shifted. The weight that usually surrounded Diana was gone, like she'd been carrying something invisible and had finally set it down. She gathered her things in silence. The ceramic mug with the company logo, the awards, the photographs of her with her father, all the markers of her authority. She picked up the mug once, the one that said CEO. She held it in her hands for a moment, and then she set it back down on the desk. The elevator doors closed behind her at 1:47 in the afternoon. And somewhere in the building, people began to breathe differently, like the weight of her presence had lifted, like it was suddenly possible to be fully human at work. Ethan gathered the 9th floor at 3 o'clock. Not in the conference room, in the open space where work actually happened, the space where people passed each other every day on the way to the printer, to the kitchen, to the window. People came out of offices and away from desks. They weren't sure why they were gathering, but they knew something had changed. Word traveled in a building the way it travels everywhere. Diana had been fired. Ethan Cole was the owner. The power dynamic that everyone had been living inside of had been turned completely upside down. Rachel stood near the back watching him. She'd been watching him since that morning. She'd noticed the way he carried the backpack like it was precious. The way he said his daughter's name. The way his expression when he made that phone call wasn't resignation. It was clarity. Ethan didn't call for quiet. The room settled on its own. Something in his presence made people still. He was wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn to the meeting that morning. "I know a lot of you stayed because you didn't have another option," he said. His voice didn't demand attention. It commanded it through authenticity. Or you thought you didn't. Or you had been here long enough that leaving felt like losing something you had put too much into. He looked around the room, not performing, actually looking, like he saw each person, like each person mattered. "That changes today. I want you to know that." He told them about the system. Not in corporate language. Plainly. The way you tell someone something true. The system that has been used to evaluate you has also been used to push you out, to make you fit into a shape that isn't human. And it's stopping. A new system is going to be built. And the people who build it are going to be the people in this room, not the people above it. He named Jordan, a junior analyst who'd been documenting everything. Keeping records when keeping records was a risk. "I'm asking you to lead the working group," Ethan said. "Not because of what happened this morning, but because of what you did over the past 3 months alone without anyone asking you to. You kept records when keeping records was a risk. You told the truth when telling the truth could get you fired. That's what this group needs at its center. Someone willing to tell the truth." Jordan nodded slowly. The first time he'd ever been asked to lead anything. The first time anyone had noticed that he'd been paying attention. "There are 4 people who were pushed out by the system," Ethan continued. "Today they're going to receive calls. I'm going to tell them the door's open if they want to come back. I'm going to tell them we're rebuilding how we work. And I'm going to tell them to take whatever time they need. Because real change doesn't happen through executive decision. It happens through people who have been hurt deciding whether they trust again. And that's not a small thing." The floor absorbed this. For the first time in 5 years, maybe in the entire history of the company, people felt like they were working for someone who understood what work actually cost. Ethan made the calls from his desk. Each one was a conversation with someone Diana had pushed out. Each one was a conversation where he didn't try to convince them to come back. He just left the possibility open to Marcus Jr., Sarah's younger brother, who'd left the company 5 years ago, unable to bear seeing the place where his sister had poured her life and her dreams. To Jennifer, who'd been asking questions and had been told that her questions weren't welcome. To Thomas, who'd wanted to propose a different approach and had been shut down. To Casey, who'd simply wanted time to grieve her father and had been told that personal tragedy wasn't a valid reason for work performance to decline. To each of them, Ethan said, "I know what happened to you, and I'm calling to tell you the door is open if you want to come back." He didn't promise that everything would be perfect. He didn't promise that the system would be fixed overnight. He just left the possibility open. None of them said yes immediately. He hadn't expected them to. Because real trust takes time. It takes more than an apology. It takes consistent action over time. It takes proof that things are actually going to be different. That was okay. He could wait. Marcus Jr. cried quietly on the phone. Said he'd think about it. Thanked Ethan for calling. Said it meant something that anyone noticed he'd left. In the background, the 9th floor was moving differently. People were asking questions. Jordan was already organizing notes about the review system. Rachel was talking to others about their experiences. People were speaking up in a way they hadn't been allowed to in 5 years, like they'd been given permission to be fully human at work. The school gate was steel and painted green, the same gate where Lily had caught her palm on the pavement that morning. The same gate where she'd fallen and scraped herself and cried for about 30 seconds, and then stopped the way first graders do, when they realize that crying isn't as interesting as whatever comes next. Ethan arrived at 3 o'clock and stood where the parents stood on the low curb, doing the particular waiting that parents do, which has no real texture because it exists entirely in the space before the thing you're waiting for appears. He'd spent the day doing things he needed to do, making decisions that needed making, speaking to people who needed to hear what he had to say. But this moment of waiting for his daughter, was the only thing that felt real. Lily came through the gate at 3:12. She was covered in playground dirt, and completely unconcerned by it, she spotted her father before he spotted her, and covered the distance between them at a speed that suggested the scraped palm from that morning hadn't significantly affected her general outlook. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the sidewalk with the purposeful energy of someone who had things to report. "Did anything happen today?" she asked. It was her standard question, delivered with the tone of someone who considers the answer a reasonable expectation. Ethan looked down at her. Sarah's eyes, his stubbornness, her own entirely distinct expression, the expression of a person who'd been alive for 6 years and found most of it pretty interesting so far. I remembered something he said. "What did you remember?" Lily pressed. He thought about the conference room that morning. The bar chart on the screen showing every metric trending upward. The photograph on his desk. Sarah laughing, holding up a sheet of paper with both hands. The rented room. 2 desks. A printer that jammed every 3rd page. Everything that had come after. Everything that had been slowly unmade inside it without him seeing. And the particular feeling of a morning that had forced him to look directly at something he'd been circling for a very long time. "Why, I built it," he said. Lily seemed to find this acceptable. She shifted the straps of her backpack higher on her shoulders and kept walking, and Ethan walked beside her, and the afternoon light came down at the low angle it reaches in October. Long and specific. The kind that makes ordinary sidewalks look briefly like somewhere worth paying attention to. The first email of the following morning was sent at 8:47, before most of the floor had finished their coffee. From Jordan Pierce, addressed to the full 9th floor distribution list, copied to Marcus Webb. It contained a single question, clear, specific, plainly worded. An inquiry about a discrepancy in the previous quarter's reported figures, with the relevant line items attached. No one asked him to take it back. No one suggested he reconsider the tone. No one pulled him aside afterward to explain the difference between his role and his authority. The question sat in the inbox of everyone on the 9th floor, and waited for an answer. And the waiting fell to the people who'd been on that floor long enough to understand what it meant, like the first morning of something that had not existed there before. Not loudly, not with any announcement. Just a question asked by someone who'd finally been given the room to ask it. 3 weeks later, Ethan sat at his desk on the 9th floor. The photograph of Sarah was still there, but now beside it there was a new photograph. Lily at 6, holding up a drawing of something that might have been a horse, or might have been a herpist's field notes, gap-toothed and unself-conscious, entirely certain that whatever she was showing him was worth showing. The ninth floor was different. People asked questions now. People proposed ideas. People spoke up in meetings, not because they were forced to, but because they'd been given permission to be fully human. Ethan had started working with an outside consultant to rebuild the evaluation system, not from scratch. Some of what Diana had built was good, but stripped of its cruelty, stripped of the assumption that people were machines that could run without rest, without presence, without the acknowledgement that they were living human lives. The 4 employees who Diana had pushed out were being called back. One had already said yes. One was still thinking. The others were considering. And what they'd find when they returned wasn't a company trying to make them forget what had happened, but a company trying to understand what had happened and become something different. Diana Ashford didn't come back, but the work she'd left unfinished was being completed by people who cared. The system she'd built was being dismantled, not with anger, not with revenge, but with the quiet determination of people who'd finally been given permission to be themselves. And somewhere in the building there was a sound that was almost like a hum, the sound of a system that finally felt right, the sound of balance, of presence, of people being fully known. Ethan never became a different man. He was already the man he needed to be. What changed was that other people started seeing him, and once they did, they couldn't unsee. And once they couldn't unsee, they couldn't go back to the way they were. The city doesn't know the difference between one company and another. But the hum, if you know how to listen, always tells the truth. And now on the 9th floor of Aurora Systems, the hum was finally singing the right song.